Welcome everyone to the March 21st, just equinoxy or equinoxy version of the Lifeboat Academy Finance and Fundraising Guild. And as is our custom, we start with a land acknowledgement, and we start by reminding ourselves that the land was here before we were. Land will continue to be here long after we are gone, and everything that we do comes from and returns to the land. And we start our meetings that way as a reminder to keep things in perspective and to keep the work that we're doing here in this meeting in perspective and our relationships with each other. Ultimately, there is a bigger context. And this is wisdom that has been passed down through time immemorial in many different indigenous cultures from around the world. And we also express our gratitude that in spite of everything, in spite of a lot of harmed relationships with indigenous cultures, they are still willing to share this wisdom with us and encourage us to remind ourselves about our right relations and our interconnection and our interdependence. So we also start our meetings by a land acknowledgement as a reminder that, as Maya Angelou says, we do the best we can until we know better, and then we do better. And so may we be constant encouragement to each other to do better and to heal harms where we see them, and to, at the very least, avoid causing any new harms, and to support mutual thriving in all of our relations. And I think usually we just take a moment for a little grounding. I know I could use it because this morning has already been a bit fraught, and nothing bad, just hectic. And so I invite you to just take a moment, remind yourself, as Ronnie says, I'm going to channel a little Ronnie today. Remind yourself of being a body in a seat. Take a moment to feel the weight of your body pressing down into the seat and the seat coming up to meet you where you are. Take a moment to just become aware of your breath, which is always with you. In breath, taking in fresh oxygen, energizing every cell in your body. Out breath, releasing carbon dioxide and that which no longer serves you. Fresh energy coming in and relaxation and release going out. And to the extent possible, I invite you to focus on the exhale. And with each exhalation, just allowing whatever keeps you from being present to just drift away, drip away, flow away to the extent possible. And when you're ready in your own time, take one more deep, energizing breath in and one cleansing, clearing breath out, and then join us back in the circle. All right. So check-in, it is equinox. So that seems to inspire a good question around balance. So the circle as I see it is Heather, Becca, Roland, and me. And as part of your check-in question, where are you finding some balance? Over to you, Heather. And hopefully, where are you finding it, or where would you hope to find it
I
if
hope
you're
to
not
find
finding
it.
it currently?
Good adaptation of the question. Where do I hope to find it? Today at 1 o'clock, those of us on the farm who are not part of the commercial farming operation, Glorious Organics Cooperative, are meeting, and there is really a lot of excitement about us growing food for ourselves, food for each other, food to share, and also opening up the opportunity for people who are off farm to join us in growing food. So it's like, for me, the balance on a community farm is the balance between the the production of food as it relates to food security and sovereignty in our local community and an opportunity for people to earn a living, and those of us who are not involved in the commercial aspect of it are still involved in the whole gestalt of where our food comes from and how we grow and share it. And holding those two pieces are sometimes contradictory. So for me, this is the greatest hope I have on our farm. And over to, I've forgotten the order already. Whoever is next.
I just decided to help my brain by actually rearranging the windows in the order that they are for Ben. And then I can like, ooh, I can even make it clockwise. Um, let's see, balance. I mean, I feel like I have a lot of practices and I'm, leaning into some of them more as things get scarier, and that's good. And I feel like there's this balance I'm trying to find between really looking at how scary things are getting and really being with like actually my life is fine right now, and not, like not having my head in the sand, but not also having my nervous system like constantly cranked up in panic. So, uh, yeah. And I had totally missed that it was the equinox today. So thank you. There's in our by our elevator, there's a kids art board and there's a kids coloring book that just went up, a page of it that just went up that says summer solstice. And I knew that wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
Over to Roland.
I think similarly, it is um, actually it is a frequent reminder of my gateway into my practice, which is simply noting and trying and keeping it simple that way. First, remember to note what's going on, remember to note how I'm feeling, and then that allows me to enter into the curiosity of how do I want to address this? What do I think makes most sense? And to always accompany that with warmth and kindness towards myself, so that my curiosity doesn't turn into condemnation. And then that's how I can feel that sort of sense of balance, that sense of equanimity. So just start with noting. Um, I just realized I did that movement over to Ben. For those not in the know, that's a homage to my Nana, who used to get um, that part of the soapbox that I inherited. It comes from my Nana, who would get worked up on political topics, and she would do this. And another thing, and she had this arthritic finger, so she would like do this little hook. Anyhow,
Lovely.
that's my Nana is now in the room. So um, thank you, Ron. Balance. I think where I'm finding balance is humor. And I was thinking earlier, I was thinking it's kind of this Venn diagram of one of the things I'm struggling with right now is self-care versus obligations, commitments I've made to other people. And that also relates to the craziness of the world versus, some sense of, being sanguine with it. So the same, I'm still trying to figure out that balance of how often to look at the news or how to look at the news. Same thing Becca was talking about, and which is also a kind of now versus the future kind of balance too, especially when the future is always unknowable and increasingly that's becoming like, in your face, kind of unknowable. So, but yeah, I think that and Roland talks about this, there's this sort of tripartite noting equanimity and playfulness, curiosity, equanimity, and playfulness. And and maybe it's the playful, maybe that's it. Playful is a sign that I've found some balance. Humor is a sign I've found some balance. And so yeah, learning how to play with it. All right. Today I will call up our agenda and just going to arrange some screens here. Basically, we are kind of mid-conversation from our last meeting, continuing to work through some of the details. I think there was the experiment that we tried in Social Roots where we put all of those notes together in one place. I don't know that this is any different than that. I think it should be pretty similar. And uh, so yeah, I mean, from my understanding, it's basically let's just talk through as many of these details. And we have invited, and Bill has accepted the invitation for our next meeting. So, and I was just going to go through and anything to add to the agenda. Heather, over to you.
Well, oh, good. I'm glad I'm first because I can't see it, and I'm wondering, is there something on my screen I can do about making it big enough? Because it's really teeny.
Well,
Where,
I can do something on my screen too. There. Does that help?
if I get up really close, I can read it now at least.
One of the things
The
that you can do is if you put there's the boundary between where the our images are and the shared screen, and there's a little button there that you can grab onto and drag towards, probably for you would be towards the right, and it shrinks the images of the videos and it expands the shared screen.
Is it the little dots
I think so.
that it says, record docs, notes, reset to default?
Oh,
no,
no.
no,
No.
there's sort on the frame on this where the people's pictures are and where the text is or the shared
Oh yeah,
screen.
okay,
There's the
okay.
bar and there's like a little box in the middle of the bar, I think.
Yeah. It's a bit tricky to find.
Ah, I don't want to take up people's time. I mean, maybe I think that I can read it now at least, so I think we're good. But
Okay.
this is something I actually would be really helpful for me. Nothing is live in the box itself. Nothing nothing is live. I can't see. Hmm. Okay. Let's just go with it for now. Yeah.
And the other thing I'll
Oh yeah,
do,
you're making it. You're clicking on it, but I can't click on it. So
well, and actually what I'm going to do also, as soon as I
You're
can
not you're
find,
not supposed to be able to click on it, right? We're not supposed to be able to click in.
right,
no,
not on
Yeah.
the screen. For you, it won't be live. For me, it will. But what
right.
I can do here,
Is there anybody else seen it really small or?
And
how much of your screen is the whole window taking up, Heather?
Um, it's taking up maybe a quarter of my whole screen. So maybe I need to do something with the in the
If you,
background. I don't know.
yeah, also if you click on the view button up in the Zoom window where it gives you different view options and there's some presets you can click that might
Okay.
help.
I'm okay, let me just take a look here and see. View options. Okay, view. Yeah, okay. Uh Full screen. I don't even have it full screen. Okay, there you go. I'm
Awesome.
better. Thank
yay.
you. Hey.
All right. And anything, basically thoughts on the agenda, any additions, any preferences for where we start, etc. Heather.
No, I'm just gonna go with you, Ben. I
Looks
know
good.
you've thought it through.
Looks good to me.
Roland?
Uh, it looks good, and I was wondering about adding maybe as on the agenda as a maybe but a future file are uh, uh, there's other aspects of the Finance and Legal Guild that we rarely talk about right at the moment that we could talk about. So we're really focused on the bylaws, which it needs the focus, and that's fine. And is there room for anything else that has to do with this guild? Over to you, Ben.
Cool. All right. And yeah, agreed. Actually, let me see if I can. I'm trying to figure out why my comment screen is so big. Anyhow, yeah, any thoughts on where to start? Um, Actually, just popcorn. Does anyone have any ideas on where to start, or should we just start at the top and kind of work our way down?
Start at the top. If we get bogged down and you think that there's something later on that you really do want to touch on, we can just, flag or, to another time or whatever.
Okay. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a bunch of little questions and then one big question that we need to talk about before the next meeting with the lawyers, and then a bunch of stuff that it's okay if we wait until the meeting with the lawyers, and it's sort of in that order of the little things, and then I think the big thing is um, the that we should talk about today for sure is the part about protected status for founders.
Mm.
But I'm fine with doing some of the smaller things first if we can whip through them.
Um,
And
yeah, that kind of,
I'm looking at the one in the roots thing.
yeah, let's go. I'm gonna go over to that too, because I do think like that's a little bit more fleshed out. Let me see if I've got it up somewhere.
And just so you know,
Yeah,
I'm going to be off screen a little bit because I'm working on a craft project, but I can hear you.
cool. All right, I might have a challenge in figuring out where to take notes. Um, all right. Whoop, whoop. There we go. Um, so
Right.
yeah, our geographic region. Let's see if we can click some of these off. Um, and I think let's just do let's see if we can do a one round around each of these and see how that works. First question up is our geographic region. Um, the uh, I think the original idea behind this was just that we wanted to make sure that it was that it actually had a really strong connection to local community. And one of the things that makes it a little bit challenging is kind of the obvious choice would be on Pender, but then our, we actually are integrated into the Southern Gulf Islands, and that is integrated into the CRD. So in terms of like easily legally definable regions, those are sort of the realms. And then the Salish Sea would be the next one up. And that one is not
CRD.
clear. Hmm?
What does CRD stand for?
Oh, Capital Regional District. So it's the Victoria Urban Planning District. Um, and so it's that kind of metropolitan jurisdiction for us. Um, I'm not actually sure how this would impact very much and I'm not sure where the impact of this would come in.
Mhm.
Probably mostly it would come in terms of First Nations relationships. And that gets really complicated because the I was just talking with a guy on Salt Spring, and there are 15 tribes that have historical claims on Salt Spring. And that includes 3 language groups. So we're kind of at this intersection when it comes to First Nations, and likewise, we have enough wiggle room in there that I don't know. Anyhow, I'm not really sure even do we need to define a geographic area for local representation. Um, and I have no strong feelings about any of it. We could maybe jettison it, and I'm not sure if it would make a big difference. Or we could pick one. So that's kind of where I'm at. Heather, over to you. Thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about it. I think that we should be focused on Pender, but I'm thinking that in the story we tell, in the context we tell, in the language I know that Ben, you have been asked to kind of frame it, is that we are really global. It's like it's kind of like I see us as being sharing our example with other people, collaborating across boundaries, recognizing the indigenous complexity, and knowing, and because I'm just, this is a little aside, but knowing that everywhere in the world this is happening. And I am in a good position to know that because I've been very involved in Slow Food International. I've just gone through training to be an accelerator on a new membership category they have called small farms. And the foundation of slow food has always been the farms and the farming and the producers and foragers, but now they are recognizing that internationally that they want to put a focus on that. And so I'm feeling like with myself, it starts with me and it goes in concentric circles outside me and connects to everything that people are doing in similar to us in the whole decommoditization of land and everything. So that's a little too rambling, but I don't think it's an either or, as my friend Ben would say. And that's good for me. Um, so yeah, I think it's Becca. I better go and look at
I
the
mean,
list.
I
Yeah,
don't feel like I have any idea. But I do think it would be good to clarify what part of our bylaws we're talking about. I think it's just the friends of class, isn't it? I don't know. I'm trying to find the part of the bylaws that this is about. So I'll keep working on that and pass to Roland.
I had a similar feeling. Where does this actually apply? Where does it show up? Um, if if it if it makes if it makes sense, I'm okay with jettisoning it because I have a similar opinion to Heather's about the shareability and the applicability. Um, And if it does make sense to include it, I'm very much attracted to using geographic formations because I feel that that shapes the people that live there. So I would go for the Salish Sea, irrespective of boundaries of man-made boundaries, to use the Salish Sea as a way of identifying, um, yeah, local, I guess.
Mhm.
So uh, over to Ben.
Yeah, and I'm gonna bounce back to Becca because it looks like you found it.
Yeah, so it's under membership groups and qualifications, which we note still in development. I don't know if I've got the most up-to-date draft, but it's probably still this. Group 1 is sponsors, group 2 is caretakers, group 3 is community partners, and group 4 is guest members. And it's the group 3, and it currently, I'm putting in group 3 in the chat, says must hold at least one Class C share and be a resident of Pender Island or a member of the Coast Salish First Nation with rights and responsibilities. So it's Pender or Coast Salish First Nation.
Mm.
That's good.
Well, and I think that we're making, in terms of community partners, then I actually agree. I think it should be Salish Sea because we're likely to have people who would be interested in partnerships that would be in Victoria or even on other islands like the San Juans. I could imagine we're already the Southern Gulf Islands Community Justice Program is already talking about establishing. We have some connections in the San Juans, and we can see them from here. So, well, let's make it the Salish Sea, and then I think we can find a legal sounding definition of the Salish Sea. I think that would be easy enough to find.
Are
Uh,
there members of the Coast Salish First Nation that would be outside of that boundary?
no,
Okay.
no. The
I mean,
Salish Sea would, yeah.
there's something different about naming the First Nation here than just naming a region.
Right. Well, and actually, because the no Coast Salish would not be in the Salish Sea, but there are other communities that are not Coast Salish that are, which I think is only the Hokominum, I think are the only other, I think it would all be considered. Anyhow, I think what we could do, it would not be too much, and this is just fact-finding work. If we say the Salish Sea, I think we can find a definition of that we could, connect to, and we could also easily find a list of what are the recognized First Nations tribes or nations within that area, and then list them all. So I think then, does that sound like a workable thumbs up?
One
Yeah, go ahead.
one little tweak. Um, to be a resident of Pender Island, so instead of Pender Island, it will say to be a resident of the Salish Sea region and or a member of one of the tribes recognized within that area. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
But isn't the
Because
same?
people could be a member of the tribe but not be a resident anymore or currently, right?
this is true. But yeah,
Because of displacement, I think it matters. I mean,
yeah.
Good
I don't know
point.
how much of a diaspora there is among those peoples, but
Well, and it's interesting,
I mean, some of them live in Washington State, right?
right, right. I mean, that's the thing is the Coast Salish cross the international boundary.
Yeah,
So that's also one of the reasons why using the Salish Sea would be
yeah.
more appropriate. The reality is uh we're more likely to want to cast a wide net in terms of First Nations involvement than to narrowly define it. Because I was talking with April the stats on the Sunshine Coast. So I looked it up. There 5% of Canadians identify as Indigenous. And one of April's experiences is probably half of them are dealing with significant limitations that, like addiction issues, deep trauma issues. So only about half of the First Nation people who are identifying as First Nations are actively involved in community. And it's 5% of the total population, and everyone is clamoring for their time and attention.
Yeah.
And so, the reality is actually we will have to work hard to get First Nations involvement. And so we want to be probably as expansive in our inclusion as possible. So yeah, if you're a member of the tribe, even if you're not, resident in the area, but you have an interest in it, then, So, okay, so I think that we've got, we've determined, what I am hearing is that we have determined that the region will be the Salish Sea and will be residents of, and actually, I think we should probably add in there organizations serving as one, because organizations can be members as well. So organizations serving that geographic region, residents or members of any of the tribes that are recognized. Does that thumbs up?
Yep.
Oh, yay, we got one done. Okay, coming back to the next one, I am juggling between a couple different screens, so apologize if it's quorum. This one is, I think it's kind of it's confirming that this is okay. So we now have changed it so that kind of working meetings, so guilds and any of the sort of like where the day-to-day stuff happens, is 3 people, and we have this sort of asynchronous policy. And then for the big meetings, 51% for the AGM. Does that thoughts, feelings on that, Heather?
Well, I think that that's appropriate. And the only thought I have, and I'm willing to just state it and then get off it, is that we're always looking at constitution bylaws to be as general as we can make it so that we can change it when it makes sense to change it.
Mhm.
And so I'm always responding to something that's really, really specific and then finding maybe it's not working for us anymore. And we don't want to change bylaws.
Mhm.
That's all. Yeah,
Covered.
I'm complete.
How about you,
Becca.
Becca?
I mean, I like it in principle. I'm a little bit wondering how the asynchronous counting of quorum works in practice. Like, because you don't know until after the fact whether somebody will have participated. I mean, I guess you can pound the pavement to get their input if you wouldn't have quorum without it. But I wonder if 3 people and 51% is sufficient, and the explicitly referencing asynchronous engagement could be either not in the bylaws, but in the bylaws it says it is allowable and encouraged without saying that counts towards quorum. Like maybe it's in a different section or something. I don't know. I mean, like if neither Heather nor I showed up for one of these meetings, would you proceed to have the meeting or not? So if not, then you're not, yeah, probably it should be 3 as quorum. Even though we would have watched a recording of you two talking to each other, but
Mm-hmm.
Over to Roland.
Yeah, I was I think thinking along similar lines. Um, and uh, for the guild meetings, uh, I think this guild might be the exception, but in the other guilds, there are new people who are coming to the meetings, and the hope is that that there will be a number of people interested in attending the guild meetings, but to be able to keep some a conversation active, having a small but uneven number of people makes sense to me. So that there's a minimum of 3 people for it present at the meeting, and then there's the asynchronous part. But that the in terms of quorum, it's who's actually able to be present at the meeting. So there's the guild meetings, and then there's the big meeting, the board meetings, which I feel like 51% makes sense for people who can actually be present. And then there's the asynchronous part. So because the asynchronous happens sort of in spite of the quorum, I don't know if it needs to be mentioned in the bylaws, and if that's something that can go into the what are we calling it? The other document, the working how we work kind of document.
Mhm.
Um, so that we don't have to talk about the asynchronous, just have to talk about the minimum, what we consider to be quorum for a meeting. So
Cool.
I'm passing to you, Ben.
Yeah, and the way that it's set up, so there was already a clause in there which came from other bylaws around um, telephonic meeting attendance kind of thing. Which, so there's a standard clause in there that says it's okay for people to attend meetings um, be via Zoom or phone. And we've expanded that to say with the, sort of the consent process, because we also laid out how consent works. And so it isn't specifically referenced in the quorum. So I think what I'm hearing is 3 people for quorum for the working meetings makes sense, and we don't need to reference the asynchronous thing. It's in the bylaws just because it gives us permission as how we do our consent process. And so we know that 3, even though it may sound like a small number, is still it works because it's not your only way of participating. Is there are other ways of participating. So 3 is good. My big concern is 51 overly, ambitious? Can we get half of everyone who signs up to, come to these meetings? But I think it's a reasonable bar for your AGM. I mean, it's pretty standard. So um, that could be one of those things that we'll figure out what to do if the I think that we're agreed on the 3 people, and I think 51 is a good enough place to start. We'll try it out and see. Likewise, if we're trying to keep numbers small, like, we don't want everyone in the world to participate. We really want this to be focused on the people who want to be part of the project. So I
Yeah.
think so again, just a thumbs up or any additional comments or questions, concerns.
I just occurred to me, what if a guild has like 15 people in it? Is 3 still enough?
I think so.
Okay. Then I'm
I
good.
mean, I read recently about something called duocracy, which is basically the people who are doing the work get some preferential, so the people who are doing the work are not always tied, their hands aren't tied by the people who just don't bother to show up.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like a coalition of the willing. So, and our guilds, and actually optimally using Dunbar numbers, we probably want to keep a functioning group is the best functioning team is 5 or 6,
Yeah.
And when you start getting 15 people on a team, it's probably a good idea to start dividing responsibilities. All right, we got through quorum. joint membership, I think we have agreement. Oh, actually, I'm switching documents. Let me make sure I'm going all right. What is next? Yeah, joint membership. I think we basically said yes, especially because of the 50, trying to limit the investors to 50. Um, and really the understanding the biocapacity of the land is more about how we onboard and how we actually work than anything that I think needs to be uh, anyhow. I'm not sure that again, it may not need to be in the bylaws. But so joint membership, yes or no, once around for thoughts. Heather?
Yeah, well, I like joint membership because people do want to participate jointly on the one hand. And on the other hand, like I know that we have a long history of treating couples as two adults. Um, and it's proven over and over again as people separate and things happen to that relationship. It's just a lot easier for them to have their own voice. So that's just an aside. That's not something that I want to necessarily influence us, but I like organizational members too as well. I think that that's strong, and it's only about if we have, say, in the organizational sense, we have people who have more weight because they are each one of them um, are able to input, and I think that that's we're protected from that in that it's just like they're one voice in a way. If they're one, if they're one membership, they're one voice kind of thing. I don't know if that's on track, but those are just my thoughts. Over to Becca.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think when would it really come down to mattering. I mean, obviously, I think if a couple's moving to the land, there's a footprint issue there. So we need to somewhere specify. I don't know if it needs to be in the bylaws that if you're moving to the land and we're trying to stay within the footprint, a couple has to have two full shares or something. But the other time that it matters is if you come down to a vote ever because couples don't agree with each other. And here at ARBCO, we make decisions by consensus and we sometimes vote and we specify that each household gets half, if like there's two people, you get a half vote. So you can cancel each other out if you disagree. But yeah, it seems like because of the 50 limit and people liking joint membership, it kind of makes sense. Over to Roland.
I think my brain is feeling a bit in a muddle. Um, yeah, and it's the pairing joint membership. Because there's couples and then there's also families,
Mm-hmm.
which is more than two people.
Mm-hmm.
There's the joint membership and the biocapacity or the footprint of the land. Um, and and so I'm not sure how to. I know that we've talked about it before, and I can't reconcile the two in my mind right now about like how that would work. Um, I mean, I'll bring up that there is the fact that the 16 footprints is our best guess, and we may be wildly off. And then on top of that, there is the uh, period of development for when those 16 footprints would actually be able to meet the requirements for 16 full diets, which, uh, who knows how long that's going to take. So so that, which means that, for those 16 footprints, for the individuals that are represented by those 16 footprints, or that those 16 footprints represent, there will be external inputs to be able to keep those organisms alive. So yeah, and I feel like I'm muddying things, so I'm just going to pass to Ben to see if the circle can help clarify things for me. And I'm just going to sign. I'll be right back. I think I need to go get a pain pill because I'm getting a bit of a headache. So I'll be right back.
Well, and if you thought that was muddy, I'm going to make it even muddier. Um, uh, Early on, one of the versions of how the board was constructed was that basically each footprint had a representative, and that um, the this is when it was just 16, it was 16 footprints, which were 1,600 shares. And the idea was every 100 shares could send a representative to the stewardship council. And basically people could club together. If 100 people had one share, they could all choose one person that would be on the stewardship council to represent their voice. Or if, two people had 50 shares, then they could do it. But I think there's something which is, and the other thing too is I constantly come back to, as a consent process, we are saying philosophically that the more perspective, the better. So it isn't a problem if there's lots of people, because if somebody raises a valid objection, which is one that affects the operation of the whole, then we need to address it. And it doesn't matter whether that comes from something half of a joint membership, or even it could just be anybody affected, anybody who's actually affected by a decision. It could be a neighbor who voices an objection and they're not actually a member. We would still want to address it. And then the voting really only becomes an issue if somebody is raising concerns that they present as an objection, but we don't agree it's an objection. We think it's a concern, and that's the only time voting really comes in, which is a way of kind of blocking a veto. It's like a veto override. So in some sense, we are hoping that the decision-making structure avoids the whole question of how many votes are there and who gets how many votes, and canceling out votes and that sort of thing. But I do kind of wonder if that's, and I'm thinking in terms of the bylaws, separating out I think what the bylaws need to say is all of the members of the co-op are jointly responsible for the development of the resources of the co-op, and share equitably the fruits of the commons. So, whether or not there's 16 footprints, we're not saying people get 1/16 of, it's not in the bylaw that if you buy a share, you get 1/16 of whatever's produced.
Right.
It's actually that you are able to participate in the tending of, and basically your share of the produce mostly comes from your participation in the work.
Yeah.
And likewise, that we as a co-op, all the overhead costs, like if we don't have enough to support the people who are living there, and we have to do bulk buy of food, then we share the costs equally or proportionally. So I mean, I think I'm feeling like it's probably maybe there's some risk here, but it seems like basically allowing joint membership um, doesn't seem to be a problem any more than it, there. I don't know. I maybe have muddied the water. So one more round. Over to you, Heather.
Good. I'm glad it's my turn. Um, because we in our co-op separate out residency, which would be your footprint, from membership. And 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 I think that that's what practically you would do too as well. You don't have like a family of six uh, necessarily being able to be, and you may have a family of six that you really want to welcome as kind of members, but you need to have that enough people with boots on the ground to make it work. And um, and again and again, it's like my question is this, does this have to be in the bylaws? The bylaws protect us
Yeah.
from having people take us over because they find something in the Constitution. Our Constitution in our cooperative was written almost 50 years ago, and we don't go back to the Constitution. But I realize that, of course, people will go back to the Constitution if they really feel um, it's almost a contentious thing because all of our consent agreements are and culture is what's going to make this thing operate. So then you say, okay, does that need to be in the bylaws? Does that protect you, Ben, from somebody taking over? And so I'm not quite sure. I'm just trying to use that kind of lens. I know that at this stage, this is the work we need to do on the bylaws, and we do it good enough for now, and then we let it go. And then we go and make all our agreements with each other that make sense. And as we get new information, we make better agreements. So you don't want to tie yourself up in not being able to make agreements because you got something in the bylaw that says you can't do that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now over to Becca.
Yeah, it makes sense to me that the residency and footprint stuff is a separate issue from the membership somehow. And I don't totally understand what membership in the Lifeboat Academy is going to mean yet. And so it's a little bit confusing because especially if we're talking about maybe having one organization for the land and one for the academy, and I don't know, maybe we need to touch on this with the lawyers.
Mhm.
And it's 1:25, and we have one more issue we thought was small, and then the bigger one. So I'd like to suggest we move on from this one over to Roland.
And I was going to pass, so I would be okay with tabling this for now and working through it some other time. Over to Ben.
Yep. Agreed. And I think it is, I think the way it's written right now, I mean, basically putting in the bylaws, we allow joint membership, is probably all we need to do at this point, and ask the lawyers if they were even saying, Elliot said when we said no, he said, like, this is not a big deal. We usually allow it. So I think for now, I think the good enough is yes, let's allow joint membership and move forward. Next up then is meeting notices. And I think right now it's set at a week. And there is a clause in there. I checked, I can't remember the details, but you can meet even if you didn't do, there's a, proper notice for meetings. And then there's another one that says, even if this wasn't properly noticed, it's still a formal meeting, but it's only one particular kind of meeting. And I can't remember, I think it's stewardship council meetings or something like that. But I mean, basically, I think we just want to say what I think based on that last conversation with Bill and Elliot, as long as the expectations are clear, it's whatever seems reasonable for us. And it really does seem reasonable for me that we would give people at least a week's notice for, any meetings. That the way we're working right now, we have everything scheduled ahead of time.
Mhm.
So we can give notice for all of the guild meetings for the rest of the year, more or less in one go, for official purposes. So it's really just what feels comfortable at this point. And uh, so thoughts, what are you comfortable with in terms of notices? Um, Heather,
Yeah,
over
well,
to you.
I think it's good to give notice for sure. I think we don't want to tie ourselves up if there's an emergency and we need to kind of caucus really quickly on the spot. And so I don't think that that prevents us from doing that. So, yeah, I mean, it's really a good practice. Over to Becca.
I mean, yeah, I don't understand why you would have that explicit exception in that way. I could see having an exception that's like, except in cases of emergency and where all affected parties agree that a meeting is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, like the only reason this would ever be invoked or a breach of this would ever be invoked is if somebody's upset about a decision that gets made
Right.
at a meeting that was called too soon and they're trying or let's imagine they're operating completely in good faith and they couldn't make it to the meeting because of to the emergency meeting because of the short notice. Um, in that case, and they were affected, in that case, all affected parties didn't agree. And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe
Mhm.
you have to go back on the decision. I don't know.
Mhm.
Thinking out loud. Over to
Mhm.
over to Roland.
Yeah. Mm, I think I think a week's notice is plenty. Um, Also, I mean, if an emergency meeting, a week is maybe even a long time. Um, and a notice longer than a week often. I mean, we have standing meetings, so that's plenty of notice. But I, I think a week's notice for an emergency meeting is actually pretty generous.
Uh,
Over to, oh, sorry.
can I just clarify? I was assuming an emergency meeting meant that we wouldn't have a week's notice.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we can put something in where it's because the point is well made. First of all, we I'm trying to think of what kinds of things would prompt an emergency meeting that would require a quick decision that would be irrevocable. It would that so I think that we can put in something about except in emergency circumstances or something like that. So a week's notice makes sense. And I think we have enough agreement on this. I think we're all on the same page. A week sounds fine. We want to make sure we put in something there about emergencies, and we can figure that out. So
And can
moving,
we take out that other weird exception that makes no sense unless we are convinced by the lawyers that it makes sense?
well, yeah, I can't, and I don't even know that they think it made sense. I saw it somewhere and was like, that's weird, and put it in just because I thought I was mostly noticed, and maybe I read it wrong, but it really was this like you have to give notice, but it doesn't matter. It's sort of like, but anyhow,
Yeah.
uh, I think we're agreed here. So in the interest of time, let's move on to the next bit. Um, I think let's the community services thing, I think is let's table that for now. I think that is not not anything we should spend energy on at this point. I think we can live with maybe we'll have another community services co-op that will form, but right now the land holding one it's just too complicated to try to figure out how to make that
Yeah.
work. So now we come to the share structure, which is kind of our big meaty question, and board composition, and those can be related. Um, there's some interplay between the two. And I think, Becca, you were saying before this actually might be the conversation that we have with the lawyers.
Yeah,
So,
I think the part of it that we should have today is, do early investors slash founders get a special status?
okay. Yeah, so I'll tell you my feelings on this. I'm going to ramble a little bit, because one thought that comes up. So personally, I feel like I am best protected by having bylaws done sooner rather than later. Like rather than what's in the bylaw, my goal would be to have bylaws, even if I have the same rights as everybody else. And um, when we were starting to talk about the protections, then it was really what came up for me was we're talking about different kinds of capital that are being invested. And and maybe that is something, I don't know how we might do that, but it's basically being recognized for social and or intellectual capital that is being contributed. And that would be, and in my mind, that wouldn't be limited to necessarily the founders. It could be people come in with some special knowledge, some special connections that gets recognized. And I was thinking it may help with thinking about what's fair compensation for what kinds of capital you're investing and what kinds of returns you're getting from it. Um, so those are just my thoughts about um, so I guess what I'm saying is it seems to me like it may be more about the share types, that there are shares that recognize different kinds of capital investment and how we figure that out. But um, and also it does help me a lot to think in terms of like Amir's situation and what would be fair. It's easier for me to think about what would be fair for Amir than it is to think about what would be fair for me. And so anyhow, so I'm open to other suggestions. I guess the last thing I want to put in there is I'm really aware of founder syndrome. And so I would want to make sure I don't want to have special status in terms of decision making because I was there early. I think that actually is more likely to lead to problems than it is to actually protect anything. And at the same time, I would like to be recognized for the work that we've done to get things here. So anyhow, those are just some random thoughts. Over to you, Heather.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Number one, I was thinking with this question is that for you to take yourself outside yourself, Ben and Roland, and see yourself as being an example to other groups starting off. And it's a good way to look at Amir, and his situation is very different than you. He's actually been paying the mortgage on that land. And so it's just in principle, it's like when I look at landowners and when I meet with landowners, the first thing do is to just ground ourselves in what do you need What do you need out of this? And when they own the land, like what, you might think in some cases, one landowner said to me, it's not my land, it's God's land. And I said, okay, so what compensation do you think is fair for you to get for the 30 years that you have put into this land and created this beautiful organic farm? Like what is your needs for retirement as you age and all of that when you put so much of your life force energy into this? So to me, that is a key kind of question for those of us who are long term, who don't come in and out, but just, like myself, who've spent like 40 years in this community or more. So that's the one thing, and I don't see it as voting. I see it as you're a real person that now is fit and healthy and 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 can participate. And what happens in the future? What does the community owe you for that contribution? And just to let you know that we did get the New Horizon grant, which you Ben will know, but I mean it's all about aging in place. So it's all asking the question about how do we support community-wise for people who have long-term kind of commitment. And you might ask that self right now, if you were to leave right now, are you okay? Do you need any compensation and whatever? Um, so I don't know if that's a little bit not answering the question directly, but I think it's putting it into kind of context.
Mhm.
Becca.
Yeah, I really appreciate this conversation, and I really appreciate, Ben, what you're saying about founder syndrome. And um, I think my concern is for you guys as my friends and
Mm-hmm.
beloved. Like and also for the model, for the future. Like, is there a way to set this up so that you get recognized and compensated for your leadership and intellectual property, blah blah blah. I mean, I hate that term, but like, because we live in a capitalist society still, um, I don't want you guys to be destitute in your old age. And even if like I were sure that the social safety net would take care of you, like I still think there's a fairness thing about like all the heart and soul you have already put in and will continue to as this moves forward. And um, will you be okay? And will it be fair? But I also feel like it might not be possible. Like there may be a fundamental conflict of interest between as Class A and Class B are currently articulated, for instance. Like 10 years we do one thing and after 10 years it reverts to capitalism, or like, I mean, maybe there's that kind of compromise, but like the bottom line might be, unless the people with the financial capital are willing to just outright give in a charitable way, in what's considered in our society a charitable way, to give you the actual ownership of the land. I don't know how to take care of it otherwise, and I would love to know.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I heard in what you said, Ben, possibly a new class or type of capital. Like right now we have financial and labor, and intellectual is actually, or intellectual, and which I think is a way of including the history of the labor you've put in, like all the experiments you did on the other land, and um,
Mhm. Mhm.
that instead of like how many hours did you put in and trying to compensate for that financially, but like maybe calling that intellectual capital. I don't know. Over to Roland.
Well, so much. Um, I mean, um, okay, where to start? There's the uh, proposing the 10-year experiment is um, kind of an investment in that it's going to work. And the experiment is there um, to be able to make something that is functional. Because if it's not functional, then there's no reason in continuing it. But if it is functional, then the the place should be in a position to be able to and has likely already started to buy back shares from people who don't want to have a long-term involvement in the project. So to begin, that this is, in my mind, this is part of the reason why we're setting it up as a 10-year experiment. Within that time, we should at least be able to show that it's viable. And if it is viable, then the people who only are investing for a short period of time will start to be paid back. Um, in terms of, and then there's, I think that there's a bridge between that and getting, and for the lack of a better way of putting it, getting compensation for what we've invested in the project. Um, and I feel like there is a link there, and I think we can flesh it out. Um, just in terms of the founders thing, um, and I think I was thinking a lot in the way that Heather was talking about how to think through it. It would be to what would be a way to acknowledge the money value of the work each founder has contributed, and and how much of it, and I think that then being able to acknowledge that, and that each founder can then make decisions sort of like as a one-time thing, sort of like, okay, now we have what we need to be able to buy the property, and what does that look like? At, well, okay, so scratch that. I think it is, how can we figure out what the actual money value is? And then it's up to each founder to decide how much to redeem and how. So that would be um, uh, for myself, I would say it would be a tenure on the land. And what is my how much of it how much of it will would that go towards my footprint, the share that I would buy. um and then in hearing Ben talk about founder syndrome, there's also acknowledge, and also what Heather was saying, there's also some ongoing work. So it's not that once we buy 9891 Spalding Road, that then we're done. There's ongoing work that where this work is continues to be useful on a larger scale. So 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 there's that to consider. And in terms of founder syndrome, I think I and I agree And I get it because part of it is being able to let go of the reins for how things are, so that more people and that's part of applying sociocracy. People are involved in how things shape up or take shape. And it makes me think of how I imagine that eldership works, that part of it is being able to provide counsel, to be able to impart knowledge as a kind of um, moving that knowledge and those abilities to the next generations. Um, so that part of what I would like as one of the founders is the right to age in place, to be cared for and age in place. And I think that ties into um, again what Heather was talking about with the New Horizons grant, etc. So those are my initial thoughts. Um, over to Ben.
Yeah. I'm thinking in terms of, so I always come back to, and probably to my detriment, I come back to sort of first principles. And partly what I'm trying to establish is a place where the land cannot be owned privately, right? We're taking the land out of the enclosure and putting it back in the commons. But the land's only part of it, because then on top of it, there needs to be infrastructure that requires work to create the infrastructure. And and ironically, I think thinking in terms of capitalist language can be really helpful, because the commons, if the commons is the means of production, but it's sort of the raw means of production, then there's infrastructure on top of that that um, using those resources cleverly, responsibly in a way that develops them will mean that there's more production, there's more productivity in a sustainable way. So more people can be fed and more people can be housed. And so that's kind of the profit, is the ongoing productivity of the land if it's allowed to be cared for. And so really the only component, it's okay for people to be compensated for developing infrastructure. It's just not okay for people to be compensated by keeping other people off of the raw material. So that's, I think, where Roland was talking about the buying back is, it's really kind of buying back access, permanent long-term tenure to the raw materials. And then once we have access, we still have to talk about what's fair contribution in terms of effort in for what you receive. So I'm not I think that yeah, Roland and I think are on the same page. The whole idea with the 10-year experiment was it was removing rent long enough that we could demonstrate that if people are allowed to care for the land as they see fit, the land is more productive and so it's more profitable, but not in an extractive sense of profit, in an actual, vibrancy. It produces more food, it produces shelter, that kind of thing. So the whole 10-year experiment was really trying to figure out a way of just removing rent from the equation. And it might be that we separate, I know like our real estate taxes are the price of the land and then the value of the land and the value of the improvements on the land. And it could be that we separate that out. And so people are actually investing in the price of the land and investing in the infrastructure. So basically, there's what we're purchasing as already developed infrastructure. And so Class B shares are around, it's kind of like we're talking about the infrastructure is kind of the embodiment of previous work that was done. And that might mean that we really shift the pricing of Class B and Class A shares. Still has to come out in the wash, right? You know, it still has to be able to purchase the property, but anyhow, I'm a little bit rambly, and also I have to pee so bad I can't think straight anymore. So I'm going to take a bio break, but you guys can continue to have conversation and just take notes. I'll be right back.
Whoa. So I think it's over to me, and I kind of got lost in all of that, tried to follow it but having some difficulty. So let me just ground on what I think are the major points for me. One is I get really nervous when we talk about the land itself somehow um, needing to prove itself, or the any kind of compensation of support giving to founders, because I'm on the founder question here, in order to recognize their contribution. And I guess for most people that has to be somehow, what do we call it? You know, monetized. And more, what I'm really interested in is communities that recognize founders by supporting them as they age in place in whatever particular way they need, whether that's adaptive housing or checking in on them, making meals, or involving them, recognizing their contribution, letting them move from being sort of really active to even maybe just receiving. There's a whole, for me, a whole community of thought around that, and I guess that's why I'm thinking that I would really like Lifeboat Academy to be one of our case studies in the research we do around aging in place, because we're starting uh, here without the developed community. And how do you put in place all of, both culturally, physically, socially, spiritually, how do you put in place to keep on honoring Ben and Roland, for example? And that they have that assurance that they can stay there forever. And even if they're not productive and we can't figure out like how many hours they put in terms of how much compensation they could get, I don't even really want to go down that road. So I don't know how helpful this is to this discussion, because we're focused on bylaws and we're focused on the productivity of the land and everything. And that's kind of like, when I think about the founders, that isn't what I think about. I don't think about that in terms of myself. And so I don't think about that in terms of the two of you either as well. Or anybody else who wants to make this their home. It's more like, when you have a home, what do you have the agency to do? I mean, you can bring your family in to take care of you in your old age, for if you had your own home. Would the community be in touch with your family and see what can we do in support of, say, Ben or Roland as they're aging out? So compensation for founders can take many different forms. And if the founder wants to come out and they put all this time in, I mean, maybe we buy them out. In the cooperative that we formed, like Glorious Organics Cooperative, which is a worker co-op, we had no provisions for any of this, and neither was our culture even thinking about it. And then, but those of us who were going to retire felt it was fair, not necessarily that we needed it for ourselves, but this is not okay that you put 30 years into, you build this whole business up, you walk away, and people build on that. And then sometimes you say you can't afford it. Well, you can afford it. You can borrow money and pay people out if that's what you think is appropriate. So I'm rambling a little like you, Ben, but it's a big question. and I want to address it. And I think we don't necessarily have to address it just through the bylaws. In fact, that's probably not where we have to address it.
Mm.
You know, because then we get into quantifying and we get into shares and how much shares are worth and whether the land is going to be productive enough and all that. And to me, that really isn't, that's really diversionary. And
Mm.
we can always say, no, we can't do it. Rather than, okay, how do we support you as you go forward? Anyway, that's my thoughts on it. And to Becca.
Yeah, I mean, our co-housing community is trying to talk about aging in place also, and it's tricky. And even when people own their own units and stuff, because not everyone has family, and founders and other people who moved here later who are also aging sort of are in a different category in people's minds to some extent. Like people who've lived here since the beginning, some of them feel like they owe the founders more than somebody who chose to move here when they were 65. And of course, aging isn't the only way we become disabled too. And
Oh,
so it I think in a way they're overlapping, but we might want to try to separate, as Heather suggested, I think, founders from aging in place a little bit. And um and I also get nervous when we talk about the land having to I think it would help me, and obviously we don't have time to do this today, but to like just try to spell out as concretely as possible 2 or 3 scenarios in 10 years. Like and um because I hope it'll succeed and it'll be great and there'll be no issue. But I think in order to get enough financial capital to buy the land together, we need to have a plan. You know, it's like a prenuptial agreement for the marriage that you hope will last until death do us part. But if it doesn't, what's the plan? And um, just to say we'll sell the land in 10 years if it doesn't work is doesn't recognize the need for security that you guys have, and B doesn't actually probably meet the investors' needs either, because what if, you know, one of the investors is your dear friend and doesn't want you to be homeless, and B, what if you can't sell the land as Steph can't right now? And so I don't know. It's a conundrum. Over to you, Ben. No, Roland.
Well, I keep coming back to the idea of eldership or knowledge keepership, and what does that look like, and what does that entail in terms of a place in well, and it's a very used word, but I haven't found a different one yet. But the collective or the community. Um, uh, and because the capitalist system doesn't acknowledge the roles, very important roles that non-compensated people play, like parents and and elders, and even children, I would say, in terms of teaching on a day-to-day just by being. Anyway, so I keep coming back to that notion. It's an interesting idea of not putting the founders thing in the bylaws, which I think for me begs the question of what are the benefits of putting it in the bylaws, and being able to weigh the value of spending time on it that way. Um, and over to Ben.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation in part because I think of the expression, the circle and the square, and game A, game B, because a lot of what we're talking about, I think I can speak for Roland and I in this. I feel like in terms of the scenarios, the least likely scenario in my mind is that in 10 years we are talking about the economy in the same way that we are now. That we're thinking that, well, yeah, everything else being normal. So, for me, the security comes from the actual land itself. And my scenario, what I think is pretty much regardless of what we can accomplish. I mean, I think we can build up the food production and the ability to house and shelter people here. And I think whatever we do, no one will want to sell, because having access to food production locally in a relatively stable part of the world will be more valuable than you would ever imagine selling.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we're playing out these scenarios, the fact that everything's going to look more or less the same as it does now, I think is an unlikely scenario. And I think part of the challenge right now is that we're trying to figure out how we can maintain game A rules in perpetuity. And what we're trying to say is we need to be establishing game B rules. And that's going to mean, up and down the line, including, how things like how do we age and commitments over time, because I mean that's part of the aging in place, is that we have this kind of very transactional understanding of our relationships to each other. Are you productive? Are you and this is all that rent taking thing. I get activated because I don't think we all appreciate how deeply the idea of rent taking is embedded in us individually and collectively, and how destructive it is, because it means that there are people who think they deserve rent, who sit back with their arms folded and expect everyone else to do work for them. And, so we're worried about our compensation when we aren't productive anymore, but somebody who is landed doesn't, because they've got the land. So other people need to work for them. And I think another thing too that I just want to put out there is that, we're talking about our security in 10 years, and we are incredibly insecure right now, you know, and I would be willing to have a little more security now in, and the ability to work towards security in 10 years than to have less security now because we're worried about me being secure when I don't even know what the world's going to look like in 10 years.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not entirely sure how many of us will be around in 10 years, like things are very crazy and chaotic. So anyhow, I know it's sort of right now, I think we're putting a lot of effort into maintaining the status quo. And what would it look like if we had to maintain the status quo for 10 years? And I think Roland and I are both talking about a radically different, and it's still an economy. I think this is one of the things I like about Game B, the language around Game B. It's still an economy. It's just, we still have to be productive. We still have to figure out how people get fed and sheltered, and how we compensate each other fairly. The only difference is we're taking the rent taking part out of it. In my mind, I was having a conversation with somebody who completely blew up when I said this, but in my mind, it's actually purer capitalism than what we have right now. It's how Adam Smith envisioned capitalism, is I think what we're trying to recreate, but we have to winkle out all of those areas where the expectation that the people who are going to invest financially get special privilege over the people who are going to invest by labor, or by contributions. So anyhow, we are after time, and I don't think this seems like a bigger nut to crack. So the question is, right now, our next meeting is scheduled with the lawyers. Do we want to, A, schedule another meeting between now and that meeting? B, postpone the lawyers coming from the next meeting? Or C, try to work through some of these questions, or actually continue on because we've talked about it enough and we can have this conversation with the lawyers? or D, try to work it through some other way without meeting. Let's just do once around thoughts
Okay.
on approaches. Heather, over to you.
I'm prepared to meet before the lawyers, so we don't delay it. And yeah, and any other, but that's the first option. I think that strikes me. I'm prepared to go for another 15 minutes if we want to wrap something up so that you have something to say to the lawyers. Becca.
Um, I am not sure I'm going to have time to meet before the lawyers because there's a big election on April 1st, but I would try. I think we could continue the conversation with the lawyers. And I don't think we're going to have just one more meeting with the lawyers potentially. Like maybe there's a, it's an iterative thing. Like maybe they give us more, we've resolved some other things. They help us think about this, and then we talk about it some more amongst ourselves. So I'd rather not postpone the meeting with the lawyers, but I'm open to be convinced otherwise. Roll on.
Yeah, I agree. So there's a number of things that we haven't talked about, but I also want to celebrate the things that we did talk about, and we did check some things off, and we've made some headway. Now I'm wondering a rejiggering of the agenda to see what do we have to talk to the lawyers about. And does that make sense? That with that, do we need to talk anything else through before we meet with the lawyers, or do we already have things that we can talk to the lawyers about? As we can see in this meeting, we didn't get through to everything we wanted to talk about, and that will likely be the same case when we meet with the lawyers, if we maintain the same date. I'm open to having another meeting between now and that meeting time. Um, and uh, and I'm trying to remember. I know Bill is involved in. I think there's the big election coming up, and that it's he's involved in it. And what does delaying mean in terms of his availability, is maybe another thing. I don't know if he'd be more available afterwards
The
or
election's on the 1st, and our meeting with them is on the 4th, so I don't think it's an issue.
okay. Okay. Um, all right. So then scratch that last one. It should be okay to meet. I guess it's if we can meet beforehand, and do we need to, or do we already have enough on the docket to talk to them about and with. Over to Ben.
I'm just looking, and actually we really got through, because we sort of were touching on I also really I have found that having time for the dust to settle is really useful for me. So I'm going to make a proposal. What I'm hearing is, and I agree, um, there we don't want to postpone the meeting with the lawyers. So our next meeting we will have with the lawyers. We want to make sure that we have a reason, it would be valuable to meet with them. But as Becca is pointing out, it may be that we just it's not going to be the last meeting with the lawyers. And so having some of these conversations, I want to say this, uh, best not to postpone, and to Roland's point, best to make sure that we are clear on what we want to cover in that meeting, and that it's a good use of time with the lawyers. And I think we can clarify those questions between now and then. And I think in clarifying those questions, it may become obvious that we also want to have some conversation internally. And then we'll see whether or not what we can do either with emails back and forth. I'm assuming that those questions will get a little bit more sort of concise. And if not, then we can go from there. But so to recap, I think we're saying let's assume we will meet with the lawyers at our next meeting. And we will do some work in between this meeting and that meeting to let the dust settle and make sure that we have a clear set of what we want to talk through with them. And in clarifying that, some other next steps might present themselves, but we won't know until we do that. So I'm seeing head nods. So, all right. So, yeah, and actually I would like the opportunity to kind of process some of this conversation and see whether or not I can formulate a response that might help clarify some of the questions. So as caretaker for this circle, that'll be my job to try to sort of synthesize some of this conversation and figure out what those focusing questions are. Okay, cool.
Thank you, Ben.
You are all awesome. And I've got to say, lately I've just been I look forward to meetings. I have too many of them. But they really are I get excited by watching things weave together. And you know, it really is when the process works, it's for me, it's just kind of electrifying. So thank you all for being who you are and for having stuck through the icky, uncomfortable, what are we doing? What is this work thing? And anyhow, that's my checkout. So once around then for takeaways, last thoughts for the good of the cause. Over to you, Heather.
I have so many takeaways and so many things up in the air for me too. I'd like about 15 minutes with you, Ben, at some time when you are available, to follow up and just to crystallize a few things here. And I agree with you. I think we're making great progress, and the learning that I take away and share. So that's kind of like what I really love about this. Over to you, Becca.
Yeah, I appreciate all of you, appreciate the grounding and the visionary work. And, you know, it's a lot of uncertainty, and it's good to be with other people who are facing that
Certain
together.
too.
Right? Who are uncertain.
Uncertain too.
Roll on. You're right.
I think I'm going to reiterate, celebrate, actually celebrate what we've done, but also celebrate all of the checkout good stuff that you've been talking about too. So that's it for me. Ben, do you want to lead us out?
Well, that's it. Bye, y'all.